Hi everyone, Musashi X here, back with another countdown episode. Now you might be wondering what's with this whole getup. As the shirt says, the PlayStation brand has been around since 1994, spawning 4 consoles, going from the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 4, and 2 handhelds, the PlayStation Portable and PlayStation Vita. However, at the time of this episode, in about a few weeks, well, to be more accurate, November 12th, the PlayStation 5 will be hitting store shelves. Now the question is, will I be getting one myself? The answer is yes, but I made a promise to myself that I won't be getting one until my birthday a few months from now. But to those that were actually able to, or rather will be getting a PlayStation 5 on day one, more power to you.
While I won't be getting the PlayStation 5 on day one, I will however get some of the games for the console on their first day, as I also want to hang on to the pre-order codes, so once I get my own PlayStation 5 by February, I'll then be fully prepared.
As stated on my previous video, I said that I would be creating a big project for this countdown show. And that big project in question is what I would call the road to PlayStation 5. As in each episode, I will be naming my list of the best games for each console and handheld. And we're going to start things off with the PlayStation 2. Now why is that?
Back in November 2018, when I first started this countdown show, I did a countdown on PlayStation 1 games worth modding on the mediocre PlayStation Classic Mini. So technically, I already named my best games for the console.
So in today's episode, I'm going to be naming my top 20 best PlayStation 2 games. Why top 20? Why keep things top 10 when you can double down? The road to PlayStation 5 begins now. Right here on Top of the Game Chain.
Oh goodness, yes, the PlayStation 2. Considered to be the greatest console of all time, and it definitely shows with such a diverse library, and went on to becoming the highest selling home console of all time. All the fun that the PlayStation 1 did for me in the old days, the PlayStation 2 did a great job on delivering even more entertainment.
When my folks got me the PlayStation 2 for my birthday years ago, I was very ecstatic on having the chance to try out some of the many great games that this console had to offer. And it's also during those times that I would find myself renting a lot of games back when Hollywood Video was still around. Every once in a while, I would find myself going back to playing this console. Whether it's for nostalgia, or the fact that I still have a lot more games in my collection that I've yet to play or I haven't defeated yet. In addition, since this console came out in 2000, right now, it's 20 years old. Now, before I continue on, I would like to give a shout out to 2 people who not only gave me inspiration to do this countdown, but also gave me the motivation to do this whole marathon.
The first one is Some Call Me Johnny, who I followed, and it was thanks to his PlayStation 1 and 2 videos that inspired me to do this countdown. By the way, Johnny, if you're watching this, thanks for giving me that shout out from 2018. You might not remember, but it was back in the final year of Sonic Fan Jam in which you met one of my YouTube friends, G to the Next Level, and he asked you if you can make a shout out to me, and I appreciate the shout out. Also, shout out to G to the Next Level for making that shout out possible as well. Speaking of G, the second person to give a shout out to is a good friend of mine and G's named Sam, aka Triple S Entertainment, as I was also inspired by his PlayStation 2 video.
The library of the PlayStation 2 is very robust, even more so than the PlayStation 1, that during one post I made on social media, I jokingly stated that the one thing I criticize on both Johnny and Sam's respective PlayStation 2 videos is that they're not making it easier for me to make this list, if only because the library is very diverse. So before we kick off this countdown, I'm going to set up some ground rules of how this countdown will go.
1. To make it as fair as I can, each entry will just have one title per franchise, but there will be some exceptions. Which brings me to my next rule. 2. If there's a game within the same franchise that plays on a different genre, it will also be considered. Spoiler warning though, there is none. At least in today's countdown. 3. As I do have a modded PS2, imports will also count. And 4. Games ported to the PlayStation 2 from a console that it originated from will not count unless it has seen some additions or enhancements, and believe me, one game in particular will show up in this countdown.
So let's first start off with some honorable mentions.
Spider-Man, crashing apart.
Well, what have we here?
Fight one! Ready? Go! Two の方で行く。
フォローはしようかな。
In addition to those games, I'm also throwing in the Jak and Daxter series as an honorable mention as well. And the reason why is because, even though I liked and defeated the games, except for Lost Frontier because I haven't started on it yet, don't get me wrong, these are great games, but the series doesn't gravitate to me that much as other mascot platformers on the PlayStation 2. As stated, making a list for this countdown is not easy at all. So if by any chance there's a game that I didn't mention, it's not that I forget about it, it's just that the library itself is just way too big. There are some games that I've yet to defeat and give an honest opinion about, and there are some games that I thought were good, but it turns out they were either bad or disappointing. With that said, let's start this countdown proper.
We'll start off with a very destructive game, Twisted Metal Black. I enjoyed the heck out of the first two Twisted Metal games, while the third and fourth game, not so much, since they were done by 99 Studios. I mean, they're not that bad, at least in my opinion, but the payoff at the end of each game is not as great as 1 and 2 were. Twisted Metal Black, however, brings back the overall fun factor that the very first two titles had, as it was done by the original staff of those two games under a different studio. Story-wise, you could say that Twisted Metal Black is sort of a reboot. Granted, you still have the plot of Calypso hosting a demolition derby called Twisted Metal, and will grant the last driver standing one wish. Twisted Metal 1 and 2 have very demented storylines, and the plot of each character in Twisted Metal Black really delved into that aspect. Almost sort of like Creepypasta before Creepypasta was even mainstream. As with any other Twisted Metal game, you select a vehicle of your choice, learn each driver's motives in the tournament, and drive around destructible environments while also taking out other contestants with your machine gun and an assortment of ballistics that you can pick up around the field. Many arenas will also have stage hazards that can result in an instant defeat, whether it's being crushed by trash compactors in a junkyard or fall off from a high-rise. Not to mention, the game has great use of weather effects to confuse some players and make the challenge more interesting. Next to Twisted Metal 2, Twisted Metal Black is one of the best games in the series with its wacky specials, dark story, mindless hysteria, and it has great visuals for a game that will soon to be 20 years old itself. You can find a copy of the game for cheap online, or you can also download the game on the PlayStation 4. But there's more mayhem to come in this countdown. We step into the Colosseum with an underrated gem from Capcom, Shadow of Rome. The plot of the game centers around the year 44 BC, the year in which Julius Caesar's assassination took shape. The game centers on two protagonists, Agrippa, a soldier of the Roman Empire who purposefully gave up his position and becomes a gladiator in hopes of freeing his father, a high-ranked general who was accused of being Caesar's murderer, and Octavianus, Agrippa's best friend and nephew of Caesar, who's trying to get to the bottom of the conspiracy for the same purpose he shares with Agrippa. As Agrippa, you'll engage in a series of gladiatorial matches with different stipulations, taking out all other gladiators with a variety of weapons like swords or clubs, and the game has a system in which, with repetitive use, weapons can break. Just like in actual history, you can expect for this game to have heavy amounts of violence because depending on the weapon, you can either break your enemy's limbs or outright dismember them, and by increasing your salvo points, not only would you gain approval from the audience, but you can also get their attention enough to send out stronger weapons for more ways to defeat your opponents, or as shown here, take them to Suplex City. Of course, it wouldn't be the gladiatorial games without Circus Maximus, a high-stakes chariot race where you either make first place at the end of the race, or automatically gain victory by defeating all other racers with your weapons. As Octavianus, his gameplay is more on the intel gathering aspect. Your goal is to seek out information that pertains to the assassination by going through different areas in Rome, and use stealth to get past security and avoid conflict as Octavianus is not a soldier. You can use a variety of items to provide distractions or knock out certain people, and take their apparel to disguise yourself and pass through areas carefully. The game has really great visuals and atmosphere, both doing a great job of depicting how the Roman Empire was during that era. The amount of content that you can discover in the game, the great concept of having two different gameplay elements, and nice presentation, Shadow of Rome is one action game that shouldn't be missed. It's just a shame that according to some news sites, it's one of the few gems that didn't sell well as hoped, and the planned sequel would be cancelled. Thankfully, used copies of the game are affordable in sites like Amazon, so it's worth trying out. Just be sure to keep the little ones away from playing this game. I'm not gonna deny it, I'm an unapologetic fan of this title, True Crime Streets of LA. Some would think of this as a Grand Theft Auto clone, and it kinda does, but instead, you're in control of a law enforcement detective named Nicholas Kang Wilson, or just simply Nick Kang, an impulsive, no-nonsense, and very excessive detective bent on taking the city's criminals in hopes of finding clues about his father's disappearance by force. As Nick, you go around the city of Los Angeles going through different missions to advance the story, and the gameplay has different styles in some situations. It could be shooting everything in sight at a factory, perform stealth kills while sneaking into a nightclub, engage in fisticuffs in a meat shop, or drive and escape whoever is pursuing you. In shooting missions, other than guns ablazing, you can also take cover in some parts of the area, and you can also perform precision aiming anytime, or on enemies that normal firing can't reach. In stealth missions, you can either chop or snap enemies to death, or shoot tranquilizers from a distance. When on hand-to-hand, you gotta stun your opponent enough to where you can perform special moves with the right button combinations. I do love the driving sections as it's either you escape them or take them out with your guns, and whenever you succeed a mission, you'll be rewarded badge points that you can spend on facilities to either get stronger guns, heal your wounds, gain more moves, or repair your vehicles. You can also play free roaming as you can explore the city to your leisure, and also stop more criminals by either arresting them or take out those that are resisting arrest, in order to gain more badge points before taking on the next chapter. I will say that despite how short the game is, I had sunk in so many hours into this game. There are times when there are some random graphical problems that would occur, it just got me laughing, and the game does have some good humor, especially from Nick Kang himself. While the game does have some flaws, I still appreciate the game for being very ambitious for all the elements being implemented, and it has an awesome soundtrack that I sadly couldn't play in this video, or risk a claim and get a red flag from it. This game is very cheap online, so you'll definitely have some fun time with this one. If anything, True Crime Streets of LA is way better than its follow-up, True Crime New York City. I know I'll get some backlash from this, but I just love playing Final Fantasy X-2 when I first rented the game, and I've sunk so many hours into it that I just had to buy my own copy of it, and it was the best decision I ever made. Don't misunderstand, I also like Final Fantasy X, as it is also a great game with very beautiful visuals, music, and storyline, and the sequel is no different, apart from some gameplay changes. You're only controlling Yuna, Riku, and newcomer Pain throughout the whole journey, and the game reverts back to an active battle system that was used in Final Fantasy 7 through 9 and Chrono Trigger, meaning you gotta act fast in executing your attacks before the enemy takes you down. As you can't summon Aeons anymore like you could in 10.1, the second game now utilizes a dress sphere system, in which the girls would change apparels in the middle of a battle, not only giving them a different fighting style, but it also affects their stats, and as you progress with the game, there are plenty more dress spheres that you can experiment with. I know some people would find this change very polarizing, but I enjoyed this gameplay as it's more fast-paced, and without spoiling the plot, I still find the story really good at picking up where 10.1 left off. The graphics are the same as in 10.1, well-designed models, fantastic visuals, and the world of Spira is very colorful and lively. You can explore all the locations in Spira at your leisure, whether it be discovering hidden areas for treasure, take part in minigames for some rare items, or fight even tougher enemies. The CG cutscenes are as visually stunning as they were in 10.1, especially when I played the game for the first time. I didn't expect the game to start out with a concert that plays a kick-butt song and introducing the protagonists. If you haven't played this game yet, you can find this game along with 10.1 in just about anywhere these days. From my experience, this game is really hard for me to put down because of such wonderful presentation and high replay value. I really didn't play many wrestling games back in the day, but when I rented Def Jam Vendetta at Hollywood Video in the past, out of curiosity, I was sold by this game's concept of having a wrestling game where you can play as actual celebrities with their voices included. I went out of my way to unlock everything, and it was very worth it. After playing Def Jam Vendetta, at first I thought there wouldn't be another wrestling game as great as this again, but lo and behold, in 2004, Def Jam Fight for New York would be released, and they greatly expanded upon Def Jam Vendetta's foundation. You now have more celebrities that you can unlock and play, such as Busta Rhymes, Snoop Dogg, Sean Paul, Flavor Flav of Public Enemy, and Henry Rollins, just to name a few, and the game also introduces me to other rappers that I've only heard of for the first time. The game's story continues from where the last game left off, in which you're controlling a character that you created who is trying to rise up the ranks of the underground fighting circuit, and the more fight money you earn, you can use your earnings to buy some apparels and bling to raise your character's charisma, or pay Henry Rollins to teach you some techniques. Not counting your created character, the game has over 67 fighters, and each are given one of 5 different fighting styles: kickboxing, martial arts for quick strikes, submission holds, professional wrestling, and the well-rounded street fighting, and some fighters would have a combination of 2 of the 5 fighting styles. You're not just competing in a wrestling ring anymore, as you have different areas that you can fight on. It could be in a construction site, a caged ring, or subway terminal, just to name a few, and unlike Vendetta, you don't pin your opponents anymore, as the conditions for victory has you knocking your opponents out in a variety of ways. When your opponent's stamina is at the danger zone, knockout can come from either strong haymakers, ramming your opponents on walls or structures, throw them out of the ring in some arenas, perform a strong grapple technique, force your opponent to tap out, whack them enough times with a weapon, or take them out with the returning blazing moves. With such variety in the gameplay, very detailed visuals, nice unlockables, interesting story, and a great soundtrack, Def Jam Fight for New York is worth it in your library, and great to play with friends. It's just a shame that the price for the game is at the 100 mark these days, so if by any chance you're lucky enough to find one that's cheap, get the game and don't let go of it. It is unfortunate that the series is completely done, no thanks to Def Jam Icon. Goodness, I hate that game.
No time for the weak now! Who got next, man? I'm just getting started.
I would have easily considered having Tekken 5 in the list, as it's one of my favorite fighting games on the PlayStation 2, but in October 2005, Soulcalibur III would hit the stores and I was very hyped. So much so that my first experience of Soulcalibur III was when I was playing the Namco demo disc that has the game. While I do enjoy Soulcalibur II, especially with the guest characters, Soulcalibur III expanded upon its predecessor with more content to unlock, and for the first time in the series, the option to create your own character. I didn't show it that much, but yes, you can create your own character to however you like, and you can give that character a class, and each class has 3 unique fighting styles and 2 styles from the game's cast that is associated with it. The game has 24 characters with 18 more that can be unlocked, and it has more stages that you can unlock in the game. Aside from your typical arcade mode, which is called Quick Play, the character story mode is told within the Tales of Souls mode, where your chosen character's story is presented in a series of chapters that can branch out after a few chapters, and in some scenarios, there will be some quick-time events that can have different outcomes in the battle. Exclusive to Soulcalibur III is a different story mode called Chronicles of the Sword, where the protagonist is your created character who is a newly recruited cadet of an empire chosen to lead the war against other empires in the story. It plays out like a strategy game in which you command your members in taking out enemy strongholds as well as enemy troopers en route to destroying the enemy's main camp. Whenever you defeat an enemy soldier, you gain experience points to strengthen your team, and it's also in this mode that you can unlock more characters and extra content. As it is exclusive to the PlayStation 2, it is also one game in the Soul series that is the most underrated. While it doesn't have any guest characters like Soulcalibur 2 did, Soulcalibur 3 has seen more content to unlock and interesting modes to enjoy. Compound that with beautiful visuals, stellar gameplay, wonderful soundtrack, and great presentation, I can assure you from my experience, this game will keep you playing for hours on end. It wouldn't be a PlayStation 2 countdown without mentioning the Metal Gear series. Metal Gear Solid was one of the premier stealth games for the PlayStation 1, and Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty set the bar even higher with its improved mechanics. But then Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater came, hit the shelves, and has seen some different gameplay mechanics while still maintaining core aspects of what made Metal Gear so great. Rather than playing as Solid Snake, the game is a prequel to the entire Metal Gear series, as it is set in the mid-1960s, and the protagonist is a much younger Big Boss, who was good at the time before turning to the dark side, but he also has to deal with the fact that his former mentor has defected to the enemy, and it's up to Big Boss to get to the bottom of it, as well as stopping terrorists from producing a deadly weapon. As with any other Metal Gear game, you'll always have limited inventory, and it's all about using your surroundings to your advantage and making sure you use stealth, either to take out enemies or sneak away undetected to advance to your next objective. In terms of stealth, you're not just hiding in lockers, underneath desks, or cardboard boxes this time around, as it is also about being one with nature. By that, you're also using various types of camouflage clothing and blend in with your surroundings. Given that you're mostly in the jungle, and since the setting is in the 1960s, technology is very limited and rations are mostly scarce in this game, you also have to utilize hunting down some wild game for nourishment, as well as taking advantage of procured medical supplies in case of injury or health conditions you may have contracted. The game also did a fantastic job of the visuals with nice lighting effects and nice water flow, and the atmosphere really does the job of conveying the mindset of trying to survive the wilderness with what little supplies you have. I don't think I even need to go any further describing this game. It's just that beautiful from the music, the story, gameplay, and presentation. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is a must-play.
In all honesty, I was considering taking a page from Triple S and also add in Guilty Gear X2 Axis Core into this countdown. But the reason I'm not doing so is because even though I actually like this game for its great gameplay as well as the rockin' soundtrack, adding it into the list makes it too easy. However, there is one game from Arc System that plays in the Guilty Gear engine that only a few people I know have actually heard of and actually played. And it's a game based on my favorite anime, Hokuto no Ken, also known as Fist of the North Star.
For the uninitiated, Hokuto no Ken is a manga created in 1983 by author Yoshiyuki Okamura, aka Boronson, and illustrator Tetsuo Hara. The setting is in the alternate 1990s when a nuclear war has very much left the entire Earth in ruins, causing the surviving inhabitants to try and make do with what's left on the planet. But with corruption running rampant even in that state, it's up to protagonist Kenshiro to protect the weak by defeating enemies with the ancient martial art called Hokuto Shinken. The Hokuto no Ken fighting game was released worldwide in 2005 for the arcades, but got a home release in Japan for the PlayStation 2 2 years later. Most likely the reason this game didn't see a US release was mostly due to Dragon Ball Z still being a hot seller during those years, and this game would have suffered greatly in sales if it had been released in the US at the wrong time. And it's a shame too, because the first time I saw the arcade version of this, it was from a convention years past, and I played the heck out of it in one arcade place that shot down on me years ago. The game has only 10 characters, each with different fighting styles they bring to the arena. Even though that is a paltry amount for a character roster, the gameplay makes up for it. As the game was developed by Arc System Works, the gameplay is based on the Guilty Gear engine, with some different mechanics. For one thing, you can build up to 3 stocks of your boost meter, and by spending 1 stock, you can cancel some moves or combos to perform another combo. Below your HP is the 7 stars gauge. Certain normal moves, special moves, and all super moves, when connected, removes varying numbers of stars from the gauge, and even more if the connected attack is also a counter hit. Whenever your opponent loses all stars, you can perform a Fatal Strike, similar to that of Guilty Gear's instant kill techniques, except in Fist of the North Star's case, you can perform combos and input the command in the end. I've seen so many videos of this game where players would trap their opponents in an infinite combo and cancel out into a Fatal Strike. It's usually a good idea to not execute a Fatal Strike yet until you have scored a 1-round victory, because even if you succeed in connecting a Fatal Strike while the match is not yet done overall, your opponent will gain all the stars back in the next round. So you better hope you have a fallback plan in case you've done so by accident. The visual art style is definitely vintage Arc System, as the character sprite designs are not only beautiful to look at, but also like Guilty Gear, they also have such fluid animation and nice effects, and the stage backgrounds have some character cameos from the manga. As this is a Japan exclusive, you're going to need a Japanese or modded PlayStation 2 to play this title, and hopefully you have enough bucks in your bank account, as the game itself is getting high on price rate, shooting up to at least 85 bucks. But should you get your hands on the game, you'll definitely have fun with this underrated great fighter.
Fatal KO. Where Tenshi.
And here we have our first mascot platform in the countdown. The Master Thief himself, Sly Cooper. When I first played Sly Cooper in the Thievius Raccoonus, immediately I was sold by the animation, controls, the cel-shaded art direction, and the stealth-based gameplay, and of the PlayStation 2 Sly Cooper trilogy, the best one for me is Sly 2, Band of Thieves. Everything I mentioned about the first game, they're all present and accounted for in Sly 2, and has seen some welcoming additions. For one thing, you don't have to worry about losing lives anymore, as you'll return to a checkpoint upon defeat, and you can endure more damage now than just 1 HP. Also, 2 of Sly's allies, Bentley and Murray, are now playable after some missions are done, and when you're currently not taking on a mission, you can go ahead and pickpocket some enemies to steal some currency and items that you can sell, then perform a stealth takedown afterwards. You could use the money gained to also buy some new moves or gadgets for your team to use. The controls are just as smooth as the first game and very responsive in any given situation. Sound presentation in the first game is good, but Sly 2 and onwards did it better, and voice acting is very top notch. With the open world environment, you can do anything you want before advancing with the story. It's also worth noting that you no longer need a certain number of keys to start your boss match anymore. If by any chance you haven't played the Sly Cooper trilogy yet on the PlayStation 2, it's either you can find each copy for cheap, or get them all in one package via the Sly Collection on PlayStation 3. I enjoyed the trilogy so much, and I'm sure you will as well. Let's face it, Square Enix these days are mostly about these game series. Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, and to some extent, Dragon Quest, or the current Hitman and Tomb Raider games, leaving so many Square Enix IPs left in the dust, and Samurai Legend Musashi is one such IP. I know some people have mixed feelings about this game, but personally for me, I enjoyed the gameplay and art design. I really dig the whole cel-shaded design of the game, and the character designs are what I consider not only the best I've seen, but also underrated. I mean, the design of Musashi in Brave Vessel Musashi looks nice enough in its own merits, but Musashi's design in Samurai Legend looks so kick butt, so much so that I cosplayed him in the past, although I hope to fix the cosplay someday. I will say that the intro movie of the game is like watching an anime with ridiculous over-the-top action, and I like it. The gameplay is very simple. You control Musashi, armed with both a samurai sword and a huge metal sword called the Great Ore, and he journeys through the Mystic Realm to perform a series of quests to advance the story and stop the evil Gondrak Enterprises from taking over the realm. You simply gain experience points from defeated enemies, and whenever you get the options to level up, you can decide on what stats to raise, or what I usually do is distribute them evenly, so once the option flashes, you better use the option immediately before you're allowed to gain more experience points. Samurai Legend Musashi also has a focus mechanic. While it works as an enemy lock-on, some enemies will have a blue circle the longer you lock onto them, and whenever you're hit by the enemy attack while the gauge is blue, you can learn different sword techniques that are powerful to use, and the more techniques you learn, you can pause the game anytime, or with a press on the D-pad, you can switch moves anytime. Most of the main quest in the game involves Musashi carrying a character he's rescuing, or a key item needed to move on with the story, and Musashi can either ram enemies with them, or throw them high into the air followed by a tricky quick slash before catching them down. The game also has a good number of side quests, usually involving rescuing the game's citizens, and it's definitely a good idea because as the game will gradually get harder, you'll want to search every nook and cranny in each action area if you want to enhance Musashi even further in order to be ready for the challenge ahead. It may not be as grand as its predecessor, the overall presentation is still good in my opinion, and I enjoyed the game for what it is, as it is an underrated game worth playing. I've stated earlier that games ported to the PlayStation 2 from a console it originated from will not be accounted for unless it had seen some additions, and this great ported game definitely fits the bill. Resident Evil 4. Initially released for the GameCube in January 2005, only to be ported and enhanced on the PlayStation 2 9 months later. I don't think I need to explain the game that much, as we very much played the game, and got even more ports years after, but for the time, the PlayStation 2 was the definitive version of RE4. Resident Evil 4, as you know, is now played in the third-person over-the-shoulder view, a standard that would be carried over to Resident Evil 5 and 6, as well as the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3. You're not just solving some puzzles and taking out Ganados that are out for blood at the first sight of you, as the whole game plays out as an escort mission, meaning that you also have to keep the survival of both Leon Kennedy and Ashley Graham in mind, because it's game over if one of them kicks the bucket, among other defeat conditions. The visuals look great as it has a dreary setting that tells you that danger is up ahead, and both the atmosphere and sound design gives the feel of terror, suspense, and tension. You'll often find yourself looking at every possible direction to be sure that nobody tries to sneak attack you from behind. It's also beginning with the PlayStation 2 version that more content can be unlocked, such as new weapons and a mode called Separate Ways, which follows Ada Wong's journey in the game, while Leon's pathway is also happening simultaneously. The overall presentation is very solid that I actually went out of my way to unlock everything in the game, which in itself is not easy to do, but when all is said and done, it was worth replaying the game with you being cheap this time around. You can find Resident Evil 4 cheap in just about anywhere nowadays, but if you feel like replaying the game with a PlayStation 2 and love playing that version for nostalgic reasons, more power to you. While the Sly Cooper series focused more on stealth-based gameplay with some good action moments, this other mascot platformer is all about maximum destruction. The Ratchet Clank series, and of the original 4 games on the PlayStation 2, its third game, Ratchet Clank Up Your Arsenal, that I had the most fun. To keep it short, the boys are still saving the galaxy, one planet at a time, and the meat of the series has, and always will be, the various weapons and gadgets that you procure over the course of each game. Returning from the second game, Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, is the experience system on yourself and your weapons. The more you defeat enemies, you can raise up your HP and you can make your weapons even stronger. In Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, it also introduces Dr. Nefarious, who would become a recurring villain in the series, and he's actually a funny villain, who acts similarly to Shredder in the 1980s Ninja Turtles cartoon. So it also brings some nice sense of humor in a game that's mostly action-oriented. The graphics are still great as the past 2 games were, very colorful and still maintains great special effects to convey the destructive concept the series is going for. If there's a retro gaming store near you, all of the original Ratchet & Clank games should each be affordable and well worth the investment if you haven't played them all yet. It can't be helped, stealth-based games were big on the PlayStation 2, and this game is no exception. Tenshi Wrath of Heaven, the third game in the series, and it's the sequel to the first game. I'm very amazed on how refined the gameplay is in comparison to the PlayStation 1 Tenshi games, which they're good for that console standards, but the controls of Wrath of Heaven are very responsive. As with past games in the series, you can take some items with you from your hideout before sending off to your mission, though it's possible to go through each level with just your grappling hook, with enough practice if you don't feel like exhausting your items just yet. Your goal is to take out your enemy target to complete the stage. However, more often you'll find yourself taking out enemies and exploring the area for whatever items you might find, and whenever you complete a stage, the items you have procured will be added to your inventory, except for enemy bows and spears. While you can play the game as you see fit, it's better to take your enemies out with stealth kills. You'll also notice some symbols on the HP gauge, and it fills up with each stealth kill, and whenever you fill up all the way, you'll gain a new ninja technique, which will prove useful in later stages, and each stage will have a new move that you can learn. The graphics are nicely made, with the only complaint I have is that there's too much shading, though I can understand the design choice as it tells you to use the environment to your advantage. With such great gameplay and high replay value, Tenshi Wrath of Heaven is a solid title to have in your library if you haven't done so yet. I'm not gonna lie, I find the overall story of the Kingdom Hearts series to be so convoluted, and everything about Kingdom Hearts 3 was a disappointment. But I'll admit that when Kingdom Hearts 2 came on the PlayStation 2 years past, this to me was the better game in the series. I have played so many hours in the first Kingdom Hearts as well as the Game Boy Advance version of Chain of Memories, so it's only natural that when I got Kingdom Hearts 2, each weekend that comes, this was the only game I was playing until it was defeated. I don't think I need to speak very long about this game, but I will say that the game has a good difficulty curve, there are better side quests to participate in, and I prefer the battle system of KH2 over KH3. That's not to say that KH3's battle system is bad, it's just that the whole game is just too easy for its own good, and many of the game's bosses are just complete wimps. In comparison, the battle system of KH2 is better due to the different forms that Sora can unleash. I will say that the graphics for KH2 was great for the time, and it's only in the remastered versions that it got better with improved smoothing, and needless for me to say, the story of KH2, though somewhat convoluted in its own way, it's at least told better. So if you're planning on getting into the Kingdom Hearts series, and if you wish to know the story in its entirety, just play the first game, the console version of Chain of Memories, one of the handheld games that's actually good, and of course Kingdom Hearts 2, but all other games in the series, just watch somebody's playthrough instead. Good old Dante. Women want him and men want to be like him. What with his carefree attitude, and very slick moves with his sword and pistols, and transforming into demon form to dish out more pain. So very stylish of him. The first game was an awesome game to play, while the second game, while not too bad, it's just downright too easy for its own good. But then the third game, Dante's Awakening, definitely makes up for the second game's shortcomings. What I'm playing is the special edition of Devil May Cry 3. For those that are just starting out in the series, Devil May Cry 3 is a prequel of the entire franchise. When a young Dante was just about to open up his agency, immediately he would be attacked by demons that want to kill him, leading to Dante to investigate the insides of a mysterious tower that's being risen from the earth, leading up to his feud with his twin brother, Virgil. The game is very fast-paced, and Dante has more techniques that he can execute, as you can have him fight with one of 4 different combat styles, allowing you to go to town with your combos in your repertoire, and you can gain more techniques for each style with the orbs you've collected. It's also in the special edition that you can control his twin brother, Virgil, with his own moveset, and he can be difficult to master, but when you do, slaying enemies with these moves can be too sweet. With a stylish presentation and a rockin' soundtrack, which is another great feature, Devil May Cry 3 will always stand out as the absolute fan favorite of the series. When Grand Theft Auto 3 came, it gave a whole new meaning to sandbox gaming and carnage, and Grand Theft Auto Vice City improved upon that by refining the gameplay, make use of great license music, have nice voice acting, and provide more ways to create more mayhem. All those elements would be refined even more in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which is my best one in the series. The setting looks amazing and does the job of trying to recreate the look and feel of Los Angeles without being too much like Los Angeles. The voice acting is top notch, especially from celebrities like Samuel L. Jackson, and the game features an assortment of great songs, making the overall soundtrack of San Andreas to be my favorite of the series. Aside from the many side quests and free roaming activities you can do, you can also build up the performance and attributes of Carl Johnson, the game's protagonist. You can spend money to change your looks, improve upon your build and learn some new fighting moves, improve your skills with firearms, and hook up with the ladies later on in the game. I don't think I need to go any further in explaining all the things this game has to offer, so if you're new to Grand Theft Auto, I'd say pick up the original 3D trilogy and have fun ruling the city like a boss. Just be sure to keep them little ones away from these games. I've talked about this game a lot of times in the past 2 episodes of this show, as well as discussed it in full detail in my main review show back in 2017, and I can't stress enough how wonderful Mega Man X8 is because of the game returning to the form that made the earlier Mega Man X games so great to play. Mega Man X7 left a bad taste in my mouth, and Mega Man X Command Mission, while a solid RPG in its own merits, it's too grind heavy had it not been for Capcom's usual experience system in their games. But Mega Man X8 made fans and myself rejoice in happiness. The gameplay flow is much faster and more refined, the bosses of the game have better challenges, the stages are well designed, the graphics and textures are great to see in comparison to X7, and let's not forget that wonderful soundtrack. The hunters might have some weight to them now whenever they drop down from a jump, but at least the controls are much smoother and very responsive, the weapons in the game are great to use with only a few exceptions, and there's just so many secrets to unlock in the game, you'll spend so many hours playing until you find them all, and mostly try to speedrun the game for fun. With such great presentation, thankfully this game didn't stay underrated for very long, so if you haven't tried out Mega Man X8 yet on the PlayStation 2, you're in luck because it's also available within the Mega Man X Legacy Collection Volume 2. I had a feeling that some people would be mad at me if I didn't add this wonderful fighting game in the list, Capcom vs SNK 2. When I first played Capcom vs SNK 1 in the past, it was a breath of fresh air after playing hours upon hours of Marvel vs Capcom 2. It was great seeing Capcom's finest going against SNK's best. But when Capcom vs SNK 2 became available on PlayStation 2, it got me very pumped from the intro screen showing Kyo Kusanagi rushing towards Ryu, to the very ecstatic user interface, and an increased character roster. All the characters from the first game and its Pro expansion return, with more characters during the tournament like Halomaru from Samurai Showdown, Rock Howard from Garo Mark of the Wolves, Kyosuke from Rival Schools, surprisingly, or Hibika Takane from The Last Blade 2, just to name a few. In the previous game, you only have 2 groups to choose from, which determines the kind of super gauge you'll be using with some special techniques exclusive to that groove, while in the second game, you now have 6 groups to choose from. C Groove, based off Street Fighter Alpha 3, A Groove, based off Street Fighter Alpha 2, P Groove, based off Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, S Groove, based off King of Fighters 94, N Groove, based off King of Fighters 98, and K Groove, based off Samurai Showdown with a hint of Garo Mark of the Wolves. As it is a Capcom-produced title, you can expect for the game to be very responsive on the controls, and it shows greatly. They've done a great job of mixing in 2D background designs with 3D designs, and the 3D effects are done beautifully, especially for a 2001 game. The character sprites look amazing, and the soundtrack for the game is very memorable. If you couldn't find a physical copy of the game, fear not, because if by any chance you still have a PlayStation 3 laying around, you can download the game very cheap. Still a great PlayStation 2 game to this day. This wouldn't be a PlayStation 2 countdown if I didn't add in my favorite installment of the most well-known hack and slash series, Dynasty Warriors, and Dynasty Warriors 4 and its Extreme Legends expansion together make the countdown. For those that are new, the Dynasty Warriors series is based off of the actual ancient Chinese civil war called the Three Kingdoms, where the Kingdom of Han has fallen after centuries of its existence, and warlords from different regions would do battle in an attempt to unite China as one whole nation under one banner. The very first game on the PlayStation 1 was more or less a ripoff of Soul Blade, and they didn't do a good job on it, so starting with Dynasty Warriors 2 on the PlayStation 2, they did a 180 by making the franchise into a 3D hack and slash. I spent so many hours unlocking and powering up characters in both Dynasty Warriors 2 and 3, and really digging the studio's sound choice of having heavy metal music into their games. So when Dynasty Warriors 4 hit the shelves, I bought the game to see if it stacks up to the previous 2 games, and holy freaking cow, it did more than just stacking up. Not only did the game see an increase of characters, but they also increased the number of battles, more scenarios in story mode, serving as hypothetical scenarios, and the ways you go about story mode of each scenario depends on whether or not you take on the very last stage of the chapter first, or go through the other battles first in that chapter to greatly alter the big battle at the end of it. In terms of sound presentation, the game has a great soundtrack, and the voice acting is more improved, with so many of them being well established and familiar to us from some anime we've heard them from, which is more than I could say for DW3's cheesy voice acting.
Feel the power of my magic!
The combat system is more refined, and characters can attack faster, and they can do a quick recovery upon knockdown. And exclusive only to Dynasty Warriors 4 is that enemy generals will sometimes ask you for a one-on-one duel, and if you accept, you must win the duel to defeat the general and continue the battle, but if you lose, you automatically lose the battle as well. Personally, the weapon system in the game is better than any other game in the series, as it is done by a weapons experience system. You get weapon experience by defeating enemy generals, and each level up at the end of the battle, the weapon's power increases. There are many secrets you can unlock in the game, such as meeting conditions to get a stronger weapon for each character, or better items you can equip, and in the Extreme Legends expansion, there are even more secrets to acquire, thereby increasing replay value. Out of all the main Dynasty Warriors games I played, except for Dynasty Warriors 9 because I never played it and I can easily tell that it sucked, Dynasty Warriors 4 still remains my top favorite game in the series. My second favorite in the series, well, we'll just have to wait for it in a future video. It's worth getting both the game and its expansion for hours of hack and slash entertainment. Only one game left in the countdown, so who's taking the top spot? The moment I played Onimusha 1, I knew I couldn't put the controller down. It's like playing the old school Resident Evil games but with swords, and its story is very engaging. For newcomers, the Onimusha series, as stated, plays more like Resident Evil but with close quarters combat, and the setting and characters in the series are those from actual history, the feudal Japanese civil war called the Sengoku era. Onimusha 2 improved upon that by having new mechanics, more characters to play, and different ways that can affect the narrative that even I couldn't stop playing it either. But then Onimusha 3 Demon Siege came, and it was a masterpiece and my #1 PlayStation 2 game. When I boot up the game for the first time, I didn't press a single button as I wanted to check out the CG opening of the game, and not only is the CG look so beautiful, but the choreography and special effects look very astounding. It's definitely theatrical levels of design. It's also amazing how much time and effort the team took to accurately rendering the faces of both Japanese actor Takeshi Kaneshiro and French actor Jean Reno in this game. So perfectly detailed. The production values don't just stop on the CG cutscenes. Capcom would further refine the mechanics of Onimusha 2 and make them more streamlined, and you can either move your characters in a tank-like motion like in past games, or move them freely with the analog stick. In addition to better movement, while the game is still in control of the various camera angles and still focused on your character's movements, no longer is the game being played in pre-rendered backgrounds as you can explore the environment in real time. The game picks up where Onimusha 2 left off as Samanosuke Akechi was fighting against Nobunaga Oda at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto when all of a sudden, he would be swallowed into a time portal, taking him to modern-day France, while newcomer, police officer Jacques Blanc, would be caught up in a sudden demon attack in France, only to be sucked in by a time portal and be taken to feudal Japan just days before the siege of Honnoji. That's when the next gameplay element comes into play. As with past games, there are also puzzles to solve in order to advance with the story, and there will be situations that you'll need to change things in the past with Jacques in order to help Samanosuke in the future. Usually time travel as a plot device in games are usually handled poorly, but in the case of Onimusha 3, it's executed very well. As with past games, you can also gain elemental weapons that you could use to dispose your enemies, whether it be cutting down enemies with Samanosuke, or whacking enemies and throwing objects at them with Jacques' whip, and you can also collect souls in order to power up your weapons and armor. The in-game graphics are beautifully detailed, even better than in past games. The game has an amazing atmosphere and a great soundtrack, and the overall presentation is just outstanding. Onimusha 1 is available remastered in modern-day consoles, so heaven knows when we'll get the other games in the series for the modern consoles as well. But for now, Onimusha 3 is available on both PlayStation 2 and PC. Believe me in this, once you start playing the game and its predecessors for the first time, they're so great to play, it'll be hard to put down.
And there you have it, folks. My top 20 games that I consider the best on the PlayStation 2. Do you like what you see in the video? What games on the console do you consider your favorites? Feel free to make comments down below. I would like to thank you viewers for taking the time to watch this video, and if you find this video interesting as well as other contents on my channel, feel free to subscribe to my channel at any time and also follow me on social media. I'm just getting started here, folks, because up next on top of the game chain, we're going to be looking at my top 20 best PlayStation 3 games as the road to the PlayStation 5 continues. Until then, this has been Musashi X, and I bid you all farewell. Take care, and stay tuned.